After the war, Germany gets divided into 4 zones, occupied by the Soviet Union, France, Britain, and the US. Berlin, which is within the territory of the Soviet Union, also gets divided. But after the World War, the tensions between the 4 Allied powers rise. First of all, it's a conflict of capitalism versus communism. It's also a conflict of what to do with Germany. The Soviet Union, France, and Britain agree that you should keep Germany weak, while the US, on the other hand, says that it's better to establish a democracy in Germany and rebuild the economy to keep the people of Germany happy so that they don't try to coup the government and start another totalitarian government. The Soviet Union and the US drift apart further. And in February of 1948, there is a meeting in London between the US, France, Britain, and other Western European countries. And in that meeting, they discuss whether to unite the 3 Western zones of Germany into one country. However, the Soviet Union has spies, and they know of that meeting. And a month later, there is an Allied Control Council meeting. And the Allied Control Council is basically the place where the 4 Allied powers discuss what to do with Germany. Well, in that meeting, the Soviet Union accuses the other 3 powers of plotting a conspiracy against it, and it walks out. And that is the end of the Allied Control Council. It is also the end of Soviet Union and US cooperation. After that, the Soviet Union starts provoking the West by harassing traffic coming into Berlin. And for example, they search random trains. They also send air fighters to harass planes coming into Berlin. And that led to an accident and 11 people died, which further escalated the situation. Then in the summer of 1948, a dispute over whether to install a new currency in West Germany led to a total blockade of Berlin, which then led to the Berlin airlift. The Soviet Union gives up on the blockade in May of 1949, and many thought at that point that the Cold War had ended. However, it had also become clear that the US and the Soviet Union weren't going to work together. They still had to solve the problem of what to do with Germany, and they decided to just make 2 countries out of it. The Soviet Union crafted the constitution of the German Democratic Republic, short GDR, while France, Britain, and the US crafted their own constitution for the Federal Republic of Germany. In this video, I am just going to call them East and West Germany, because it is easier to talk about. In 1955, both countries become officially independent, but Berlin stays under Allied control. West Germany then joins the NATO. However, internationally, East Germany isn't recognized as a country, because it is still under heavy Soviet Union influence, and it has a puppet government. That really angers the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union threatens to give the control of East Berlin to East Germany, which would force the Allies to accept East Germany as a country. The Soviet Union then even sets an ultimatum for the US to do that, but the West rejects the demands of the Soviet Union, and the deadline passes without consequences. However, East Germany was also experiencing a labor drain, and through the 1950s, 3 million people left East Germany for West Germany, mostly skilled craftsmen and highly educated people like teachers, lawyers, or doctors. The labor drain continues into the 1960s, and in July 1961 alone, 200,000 people leave East Germany. And Ulbricht, the president of East Germany, pressures the Soviet Union for a solution to save his country, but his ideas are rejected as being too aggressive. So then on Sunday, August 13th, the Soviet Union just isolates West Berlin and makes a physical barrier to stop people from going into the West. And they make a wall out of barbed wire that spans 103 miles through Berlin and around West Berlin, and 28.5 miles actually ran through the city, and the barbed wire in that part was soon replaced by steel-enforced concrete. The reason that didn't lead to an armed conflict is that the Soviet Union didn't go into territory of the West. It just separated it, and there was really nothing the US could do because it also didn't want to cause a war. However, because of the tensions in the months and years before that, the US had a lot of armed forces in Berlin, and so did the Soviet Union. And on October 27th, 1961, there was a standoff between tanks of the Soviet Union and tanks of the United States. And that standoff lasted for 16 hours and was luckily resolved before violence started. There were a few last-minute attempts of people trying to cross the wall before it was steel-enforced concrete, but authorities soon told the guards of the wall to shoot and kill everyone who tries to cross the border. And there was an 18-year-old man called Peter Fechter, and he tried to cross the wall and was shot and bled to death in front of Western military and Western reporters, but they weren't allowed to help him because that could have led to a conflict. The wall became a death trap for everyone who tried to go through it. It wasn't only a wall, it had a big military setup in front of it. And during the 30 years that the wall was standing, 11,500 soldiers guarded it, and they had 484 dogs who would attack and kill anyone who got near them. More than 100 people from East Germany were killed and more than 200 were wounded by guards who were also East German and who shot their own people. What effect did the wall have on the people of Germany? My grandfather grew up in the east of post-war Germany, and from a very young age he knew that he wanted to leave. In 1961, he was attending university in the West, and from one day to another, he couldn't visit his family anymore. And that would stay that way for the next 30 years while he got married and had my dad. It would always be a struggle to visit his family in the East. The wall tore apart families, it tore apart relationships, it tore apart 2 generations of people who were supposed to live in the same country. But people eventually adjusted, and they got used to the wall. And in the 1970s, German Chancellor Willy Brandt eventually recognized East Germany as a country and signed a peace treaty with the government of East Germany to stop the threat of war between the 2 Germanys. It was now completely official that Germany was 2 different countries. And while the West was thriving, East Germany was struggling, just like the Soviet Union. In the 70s and early 80s, the Soviet Union was struggling with poverty and a stagnating economic growth. In 1985, it got a new president, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he started to change the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev introduced the policy of glasnost and perestroika, or in English, openness and restructuring. He wanted to stop with the secrecy and stop corruption within the government, and he wanted to be more transparent about the decisions of the government to regain the trust of the people of the Soviet Union. He also wanted to modernize the Soviet Union and demilitarize it, meaning troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, and he wanted to democratize it. Most importantly though, he planned on allowing Eastern European countries occupied by the Soviet Union to become more independent. He faced some problems, for example, opposition from basically everyone else in the government, and his policies contradicted itself. For example, he wanted a revolution from above, he also wanted to democratize it and make it more open. And he wanted to restructure and modernize the economic system by privatizing parts of it, but he also wanted fast economic growth. When you want to reform an economic system, though, most of the time you do not get economic growth right away. By doing this, however, he was inching closer to the US. And that's why his policies were also called the Sinatra Doctrine, after the Sinatra song I Do It My Way. Allegedly, Mikhail Gorbachev said that the Eastern European countries occupied by the Soviet Union were now allowed to do it their way. And by allowing that, he paved the way for German reunification. But that meant that people in East Germany gained hope. Hope that they could also have more freedom. They saw how the West was thriving, And they also had realized at that point that communism wouldn't solve their problems. However, the government of East Germany had other plans, and they declared that any person trying to reform or protest the government would be punished. But then in May of 1989, things changed. First of all, the border between Austria and Hungary was opened, which was the first hole in the Iron Curtain. And many people from East Germany fled to West Germany. Also in May of 1989, elections were held in East Germany. And they were forged as usual, and the governing party won. But this time people didn't accept the outcome, and they went to the streets. A new liberal left-green movement formed itself, the New Forum, and they tried to become a party but were forbidden. But at that point, people didn't care anymore, and they signed up for that illegal party anyways, and every Monday they would protest for more liberties all over East Germany. On November 4th, 1989, the first demonstration that was organized privately and that was allowed by the government took place, and 500,000 to 1 million people attended. It was the biggest demonstration in East German history, and it is known as the Alexanderplatz demonstration. And now the government was very much under pressure, and they started to put small changes in place. They didn't really change anything, but at least they acknowledged that the people of East Germany were unhappy. And then on November 9th, 1989, very unexpected, a commander of one of the checkpoints told his guards to stop shooting and to let people pass. And by that he reunited Berlin, and people from the east and west started celebrating on top of the wall. And November 9th is known as the night the wall came down. In December of 1989, prime ministers of East and West Germany met, and the Brandenburger Gates, which is a monument in Berlin, were opened, and with that, the dissolvement of the wall was finalized. Free travel between the two countries was finalized on December 23rd, 1989. October 3rd, 1990, East Germany was officially dissolved and sucked up by West Germany and became part of the Federal Republic of Germany. The fall of the Berlin Wall was the beginning of the end of the Cold War, and for a while after that it seemed like the world was heading for more peaceful times. Mikhail Gorbachev actually proposed that Russia should join the NATO at some point, but looking at the current political landscape, that isn't going to happen anytime soon.